Some cases walk into my courtroom and walk right back out, leaving nothing behind but a case number in a cabinet somewhere. But some cases crawl into the deepest part of you and stay there for years, sleeping quietly, waking up sometimes in the middle of the night just to remind you that what happened was real, that it mattered, and that justice, when it finally arrived exactly the way it needed to. This is one of those cases, and I have never told it to anyone outside these courthouse walls until right now. There is something I want you to understand before I go any further. I have been on this bench for 28 years. I have watched thousands of people walk through those courtroom doors carrying everything they had left. I have made decisions that sent people home, and decisions that changed lives, and decisions that I still turn over in my hands on certain quiet mornings. But this one is different. This one has a phone call in the middle of it that nobody in that room ever expected me to make. And the silence after that phone call is still one of the loudest things I have ever heard in my life. Right now, I am going to trust you with something I have carried for a long time. What I'm about to share is not a lecture, and it is not a lesson I planned. It is a true story about power, about dignity, about a young man who believed the law had a different set of doors for people like him, and about a woman who walked into my courtroom with nothing but the truth and her hands folded in her lap. If you have ever sat in a room where someone with power looked right through you like you were not there, you need to stay for every single word of this. These moments do not come back around. Settle in. I am going to tell you everything. It was Monday morning, April 8th, 2024, at Cedar Falls Municipal Courthouse, 114 Garrison Street, Cedar Falls. I remember it because spring was coming late that year, and the trees outside the courthouse still looked like they could not decide whether to wake up. The sky was low and gray, the kind of gray that sits right on top of the city. I had pulled into my parking spot at 6:42 a.m., same as I always do, long before the building fills up and long before the coffee gets burned in the break room. I carry my own thermos, black coffee, no sugar. My father used to say that a person who adds sugar to their morning coffee is hoping the morning is something it is not yet. I always smile when I remember that. Beverly, my clerk of 11 years, was already at her desk when I came through the back hallway. She handed me the docket without me asking. She has been doing that since her third week on the job. She knows I like to read it alone before anyone starts talking at me. I look down at case number 2024 MC 007401, State versus Preston Caldwell, age 24. Charges listed were reckless driving and failure to remain at the scene of an accident. I stood there in the hallway holding that paper for a moment longer than usual, longer than the docket required. I do not know exactly how to explain what instinct feels like from inside a judge's body. It is not dramatic. It is quiet. It is the same feeling you get when you open a door and before you have taken a single step inside, you already know this room is not empty. I felt it looking at that name, Preston Caldwell. I clicked my pen twice, walked into my chambers, and I spent every one of those 90 minutes before the morning session reading everything I could find about case number 2024 MC 0741. Have you ever watched someone walk through a door and known in less than 5 seconds that they believe the entire room belongs to them? I am asking you something real before I keep going. Think about the last time someone walked into a shared space and the energy shifted immediately, not because they were loud or aggressive, but because they carried the absolute certainty that the rules in that room did not fully apply to them. Think about what you felt sitting near that person, because that is exactly what I want you to carry with you when I tell you what happened at 9:08 a.m. on April 8th, 2024, when Preston Caldwell entered courtroom 3 at Cedar Falls Municipal Courthouse, and every single person in that room felt the temperature change. Preston Caldwell was 24 years old, and he looked like he had been designed to occupy space without apology. He came in wearing a white Tom Ford dress shirt, open at the collar as if this were a business lunch and not a legal proceeding. He had a Rolex Submariner on his left wrist, the black dial one, and I know watches because my father wore one every single day of his working life. Preston's Balenciaga sneakers were triple white and the kind that cost more than most people in this city make in a week and a half. He wore a Louis Vuitton card holder tucked into his back pocket, visible when he sat down. His attorney, a man named Gerald Fitch, walked half a step behind him, which is the wrong position for an attorney. You walk beside your client. The fact that Gerald Fitch walked behind him told me something about who set the pace in that relationship. Preston sat down at the defense table and leaned back in his chair like he was waiting for a movie to start. He crossed his ankle over his knee, looked around the gallery with what I can only describe as mild entertainment, the way a person looks at fish in a tank, not with cruelty exactly, but with a complete and comfortable absence of concern. There were about 16 people in the public seating that morning. He glanced at them the way he might glance at a menu he already knew he would not be ordering from. He reached for his phone and his attorney put a hand on his wrist. Preston looked at Gerald Fitch the way a person looks at someone who has just reminded them of a rule they have never once been required to follow. On the other side of the room at the plaintiff's table sat Margaret Torres. Maggie, people who knew her called her. She was 51 years old. She had driven herself to the courthouse that morning in a borrowed car, a 2003 Ford Focus that belonged to her neighbor because her own car was gone. She was wearing gray slacks and a dark blue blouse I could tell she had pressed carefully. Her hair was pulled back neatly. Her hands were folded on the table and she was completely still. There was a small bruise along her jaw, faded to that pale yellow-green color bruises turn when they are about 3 weeks old. She did not look at Preston. She looked at the bench where I would soon be sitting. There was nothing dramatic about her. There was just a woman who had gotten up that morning, put on the best clothes she had, pressed them, borrowed a car, and shown up. Maggie Torres had worked as an emergency room nurse at Cedar Falls Regional Medical Center for 23 years. 23 years of 12-hour overnight shifts, of holding the hands of strangers in the worst moments of their lives, of driving home alone at 11 o'clock on empty streets because that is when the shift ends. She had 2 children. Her son Darnell was 19 and had just started community college. Her daughter Kezia was 16 and played clarinet in the school band. Maggie had raised both of them alone since her husband died of a heart condition when Kezia was 4 years old. She lived in a 2-bedroom apartment on Sycamore Lane in Cedar Falls, and she drove a 2009 Honda Civic she had paid off 3 years earlier and maintained the way you maintain something you cannot afford to replace because you know there is no backup plan. I want to stop right here because I need you to sit with something before I continue. I have laid out 2 human beings in front of you. I have described their clothes and their postures and their histories. And I want you to think about what you can already see just from that. One person walked into my courtroom having spent the morning deciding what to wear because the right clothes were a signal that he owned the room. The other person walked into my courtroom having spent the morning carefully pressing the best blouse she owned because those are the clothes you wear when you need someone to take your pain seriously. That contrast tells you almost everything. But I promise you, we have not even scratched the surface yet. Stay with me. What is coming is the reason I'm still sitting with this story 2 years later. On the night of Thursday, March 14th, 2024, at approximately 10:47 p.m., Maggie Torres was driving home from a full 12-hour shift in the emergency room at Cedar Falls Regional. She was stopped at a red light at the intersection of Whitmore Avenue and 3rd Street, approximately 6 blocks from her apartment on Sycamore Lane. The light had been red for about 4 seconds. What happened next took less than 1 second. Preston Caldwell, driving his white 2023 Porsche 911 Carrera, struck Maggie's Honda Civic from behind at an estimated speed of 52 miles per hour in a posted 25-mile-per-hour zone. The impact pushed Maggie's car entirely through the intersection. Her airbag deployed. Her head struck the side window despite the airbag. She lost consciousness briefly and was transported by ambulance to Cedar Falls Regional Medical Center, the same hospital where she had been working just 40 minutes earlier. The original accident report was filed by Officer Dana Reeves, badge 2247, who arrived at the scene at 10:53 p.m. That report noted that Preston Caldwell's vehicle had been traveling at an estimated 52 miles per hour. It noted that Officer Reeves observed Preston to smell of alcohol and to have bloodshot eyes. It noted that a field sobriety test was administered. What the report in my case file did not say, what was simply absent where the result should have been, was what that field sobriety test showed. There was a blank line in an official police document where a blood alcohol content number should have been written. I had seen that kind of blank before. I knew what a blank line in a police report means when the person in question has a father with a title. Officer Carlos Mendez, badge 1819, was the second officer on scene, arriving at 10:58 p.m., 11 minutes after the initial call. His supplemental report confirmed Maggie's transport to the hospital and confirmed that Preston Caldwell had been present when Officer Reeves arrived and had subsequently been released without arrest. And then, at the bottom of the third page of his report, in one plain sentence, Officer Mendez noted that Officer Reeves had placed a phone call at 11:03 p.m. to a number listed in the department directory as the personal cell of Chief Raymond Caldwell. That sentence was not written by accident. Officer Carlos Mendez, badge 1819, wrote it because he wanted it on the record. He saw what was happening that night, and he did the one thing he could do. He wrote it down. Maggie Torres spent 3 days in Cedar Falls Regional Medical Center. She had a mild concussion, 2 bruised ribs, and soft tissue damage to her neck and left shoulder that required physical therapy. Her total medical bill came to $11,847. Her 2009 Honda Civic was a total loss. Its estimated value at the time of the accident was $4,200. Because fault was listed as disputed in the original reporting, her insurance company had frozen her claim pending the outcome of proceedings. She had been without any vehicle for 25 days by the time she sat down in my courtroom. She had missed 6 weeks of work during her recovery, losing $9,360 in wages. She had borrowed money from her sister to make rent. I need you to sit with that for a moment before we continue. When I say Maggie Torres sat at that table with her hands folded and her eyes calm, I want you to understand the weight of what that stillness cost her. She was not performing dignity, she simply had it. The people who have the most to lose are so often the ones who come into my courtroom the quietest, like they have already survived the hardest part, and all they are asking from me is to tell the truth about what I see. That is what she was asking, and I heard her. Gerald Fitch opened for the defense with a clean, practiced tone. He talked about the darkness of the road that night, the poorly timed traffic light at Whitmore and 3rd, and how his client had immediately stopped after the impact and remained at the scene. He used the word unfortunate 4 times. He did not use the word drunk. He did not say speeding or reckless. He built a careful picture of an accident that occurred under difficult nighttime conditions. Preston sat through all of it, studying the ceiling and his own hands with equal boredom. My father taught me to listen to what an attorney is not saying as much as to what they are. Gerald Fitch was not saying alcohol. He was not saying speed. I heard both of those silences as clearly as I heard every word he did say. I called for the first witness. James Whitfield was 43 years old, a restaurant supply driver who had been heading north on 3rd Street at 10:47 p.m. on the night of March 14, 2024. He had been stopped at the same red light as Maggie Torres in the adjacent left turn lane, 2 car lengths back. He wore a plain green jacket to court, and he sat in the witness box like a man who was not used to rooms like this and was not pretending to be. When I asked him to describe what he saw, he took one breath and then just described it. He said the white sports car came up fast and did not slow down before it hit the little silver car. He said the sound hit him in the chest before it reached his ears. He said the silver car went clear through the intersection. He said the driver got out of the sports car, started walking toward the silver car, stopped about 10 feet away, got back on his phone, and never once went to check on the woman inside the other vehicle. There are people in this world who do not have to be there, but they show up anyway. James Whitfield was not subpoenaed. He went to the police station the morning after the accident because, as he told me in sworn testimony, he had a daughter about the same age as the woman in that silver car, and he could not live with himself if he said nothing. He drove 45 minutes each way to court twice because the first appearance had been continued on a procedural motion. He asked for nothing from anyone. If you are the kind of person who does not always feel faith in the people around you, I want you to think about James Whitfield. He is the reason I still believe the whole system holds together sometimes. People like him are watching. People like him are willing to tell the truth when it costs them something. We are all lucky that they exist, and we do not thank them enough. Gerald Fitch cross-examined James Whitfield for 20 minutes, pressing on lighting conditions and sight lines and the reliability of a witness in an adjacent lane at night. James Whitfield did not flinch. He looked at Gerald Fitch and said he had driven that route 5 nights a week for 7 years, and he knew exactly what he had seen. Gerald Fitch said thank you and sat down without a follow-up. I watched Preston during that cross-examination. He was making small, invisible circles on the defense table with his fingertip. He was not worried yet, but the ease in his posture was no longer quite what it had been at 9 o'clock that morning. Dr. Patricia Holmberg came to the stand next. She was the attending physician at Cedar Falls Regional on the night of March 14th and had treated Maggie Torres in the emergency department. She was 58 years old, with close-cut silver hair, and she spoke with the same quiet directness I have come to recognize in every ER physician I have ever met in my courtroom. That directness is not a personality trait. It is what 30 years of emergency medicine does to a person's relationship with words. You stop using more of them than you need. She described Maggie's injuries, the concussion protocol, the bruised ribs, the soft tissue damage, and the course of treatment. When she said the injuries were consistent with an impact of significant force and Gerald Fitch objected to my satisfaction on a narrow foundation point, she simply adjusted the language and said it again in a way that made exactly the same thing clear. The jury, had there been one, would have understood her as precisely as I did. Before I tell you what came next, I want to pause here and say something to you directly. If you have sat with this story from the beginning through every quiet turn and every difficult detail, that means something to me. I genuinely mean that. There are easier things to spend your time on. You stayed because something in you believes that what happens in rooms like mine matters. And I have believed that same thing every single morning for 28 years without exception. Thank you for being the kind of person who cares enough to listen this carefully. We are not even close to done yet, and I am glad you are still here. The second morning of proceedings was April 11th, 2024, a Thursday. The weather had shifted. It was sharp and bright outside, the kind of spring morning that feels like the world has decided something. I arrived at 6:38 a.m. Beverly had left a sticky note on the docket folder. It said simply, "More coming." I read it, set it down, poured my coffee, and sat with that for a moment. She had gotten a call from the city attorney's office the evening before. I knew what more coming meant. I had been waiting for more coming since I first saw that blank line in the accident report. When Preston Caldwell came through the door on April 11th, something had shifted. He was still expensive. The pale gray blazer was new, and the Rolex was in its same place on his wrist, but he was moving differently, faster. His eyes scanned the room when he entered rather than surveying it. Gerald Fitch was now half a step ahead of him, which was the correct position and a different position from before. I noticed it. I noticed all of it. Maggie Torres came in a few minutes later and sat in the same chair with the same stillness. Her borrowed car had broken down that morning and her sister had driven her. I only learned this afterward. She said nothing about it. The city attorney, Sandra Lowe, was a young woman I had watched grow into a formidable prosecutor over 4 years. She stood and told the court she had additional evidence developed in the days since the initial filing. Gerald Fitch immediately requested a sidebar. I granted it. He argued that any new evidence should have been disclosed within the discovery period. Sandra Lowe explained, with a composure that I genuinely respected, that this evidence had come to light within the past 48 hours through information provided by a third party outside the original investigation. I thought for about 3 seconds. I admitted the evidence and told defense counsel they would have full opportunity to respond. Gerald Fitch walked back to his table, leaned down to Preston, and said something quiet. Preston's jaw tightened the way a person's jaw tightens when they have just heard something they cannot afford to hear. I want to ask you to do something before we go further. I want you to think about a moment in your own life when you watched someone treat the rules like they were optional just because of who they were or who they knew. Maybe it was at work, maybe it was in a family situation, maybe it was something small enough that other people brushed it off. I want you to think about how that felt, not the anger, underneath the anger, that specific helplessness that comes from watching something that is supposed to protect everyone be used like a private door that only certain people have the key to. Hold on to that feeling because what was about to come into my courtroom was going to speak directly to it. And I think that is exactly why this case has stayed with me the way it has. Sandra Lowe called the certified copy of the original accident report, not the version that had been submitted into the case file, the original, the unaltered one. There is a timestamp system in the Cedar Falls Police Department's report management software that logs every single edit made to a document after initial entry, with the editing officer's badge number and the exact time of the edit. Sandra Lowe placed a printed log sheet on the evidence table. Bailiff Thomas carried it to my bench with both hands flat beneath the paper, the way he carries things when evidence matters. I looked at it. The original report had been entered by Officer Dana Reeves at 11:31 p.m. on March 14, 2024. That original entry included a completed field sobriety test result. The result showed a blood alcohol content of 0.14. The legal limit in this state is 0.08. Preston Caldwell had been driving at nearly double the legal limit when he struck Maggie Torres's car at 52 miles per hour in a 25-mile-per-hour zone. That result had been deleted from the report at 12:19 a.m. on March 15, 2024. 48 minutes after Officer Reeves placed his phone call to Chief Raymond Caldwell's personal cell number, the deletion was logged under Officer Reeves's badge number 2247, right there, on a printed page, in my courtroom, in the open. The room went still, not the still that comes from shock, the still that comes when something you already suspected turns out to be completely and undeniably true. And even though you were waiting for it, it still lands with its full weight because now there is no more guessing. It is just there. The air in a courtroom changes when something like that happens. It is something I cannot fully put into words after 28 years, only feel. People in the gallery stop shifting. They stop thinking about the rest of their day. They sit forward without knowing they are doing it. The room becomes something different from what it was 60 seconds before. I need you to share this story with someone specific right now, not after it ends. Right now, before you hear the rest, think of one person in your life who has sat in a room and watched the rules get bent in plain sight by someone with the right title or the right last name, someone who felt completely powerless to stop it. Send this to that person before you go one sentence further, because what is coming next is for them. Every single reveal left in this story is for every person who was ever told the system works and then sat in a room and watched it not work for them. Send it to them. I will be here when you come back. Gerald Fitch was on his feet before I could call for order. He said the log evidence was circumstantial and proved nothing about his client's personal knowledge of any alteration. He was technically correct on that narrow point, and I acknowledged it clearly. I told him no one in this courtroom was charging his client with altering a report. The charges before me remained reckless driving and failure to remain at the scene, now considered alongside the evidentiary context of the original BAC result. Gerald Fitch moved for dismissal, arguing the evidence had been mishandled within the department. I denied the motion. He asked for a 24-hour continuance to allow the defense to respond. I granted it. Court would resume April 12, 2024 at 9 a.m. Preston stood up from the defense table as the recess was called, and he made his first real mistake in my courtroom. He stood with his Tom Ford shirt untucked slightly from where he had been sitting for hours, and he looked across the room directly at me, and he said, out loud, not quietly, not to his attorney, but in a voice that reached every person in that gallery, my father runs this department. You know that means this all goes away. He did not say it with anger. He said it the way you tell someone a simple fact, the way you might say the store closes at 6. Gerald Fitch put his hand on Preston's arm, but the words were already in the room. They were already in the ears of 16 people. They were already in mine. I looked at Preston Caldwell for a long time before I responded, long enough that he shifted his weight, long enough that his eyes moved briefly to the floor. Then I said, keeping my voice completely level, Mr. Caldwell, I would encourage you to sit down, say nothing further without the counsel of your attorney, and understand that this court is not persuaded by the reach of any individual, regardless of their title. I let that breathe for one full second. Court is in recess until 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. The gavel came down once. I want to ask you something right now, and I genuinely want your answer in the comments below this. Have you ever been in a room where someone said something like what Preston Caldwell said in my courtroom today, where they believed so completely that their connections protected them that they said it out loud without lowering their voice? Not in a film, not in a story, in your actual life? What did it feel like to be in that room? I read every single comment people leave on these stories. Tell me what you have seen and what it did to you, because that moment, a person announcing out loud in a court of law that justice itself does not apply to them, is the kind of moment that tests every piece of faith you were ever taught to place in any institution. I want to know what that does to the people who witness it. April 12th, 2024. I arrived at 6:31 a.m. Beverly had brought her own full thermos of coffee and held it out to me with both hands when I came through the door. She had never done that before. I looked at her. She said only, "You are going to want it, Your Honor." I walked to my chambers, and at 7:55 a.m., she knocked twice and told me that a representative from the Office of the City Inspector General had arrived and was requesting a moment before the session. I said, "Send them in." His name was Marcus Webb. He was 46 years old, plain dark suit, a folder thick as a paperback novel, and eyes that told me he had not slept in at least 2 days. He sat down across from my desk. He set the folder in front of me. He said, "Judge, I need you to know what we found." The investigation that Marcus Webb represented had been opened quietly by the Inspector General's office following an anonymous tip received on March 20th, 2024, 6 days after the accident. It had run completely parallel to these proceedings without my knowledge. What it found was this: Preston Caldwell had been involved in 3 prior incidents in the 22 months before March 14th, 2024. 2 involved his vehicle. 1 involved an altercation outside a restaurant on Birchwood Street, resulting in property damage. In each of those 3 prior incidents, the official record was either incomplete, listed no charges, or had been quietly closed before reaching any court. And in every single case, the name Raymond Caldwell appeared somewhere in the associated paperwork. Chief Raymond Caldwell, badge 001. The man who answered that phone call at 11:03 p.m. on March 14th had been answering calls like it for nearly 2 years. If you believe that a badge number should never be a get-out-of-consequences card for someone's child, if you believe that this bench means nothing at all if it bends for certain names and not for others, then I want you to hit like on this video right now. Not for me. Do it for Maggie Torres, who pressed her clothes and borrowed a car and drove herself to a courthouse to ask for something she should never have had to ask for. Do it for James Whitfield, who drove 45 minutes twice because he could not live with silence. Do it for every single person who showed up to the right room with the right truth and the wrong last name. Hit it because those people deserve to know that someone out there heard what happened to them. Marcus Webb gave his testimony on the official record that morning in open session. Gerald Fitch objected 7 times. I overruled 6 and sustained 1 on a narrow technical point. Marcus Webb read from the investigation's compiled findings with the same factual steadiness he had shown in my chambers, naming dates, incident numbers, the specific edits made to each report, and the authorization chain on every one of those edits with corresponding badge numbers and precise timestamps. Preston Caldwell sat at the defense table, and for the first time all week he was completely still. Not the stillness of confidence, the stillness of a person who has finally understood that the room they are sitting in does not have the exit they were counting on. Sandra Lowe then presented the social media evidence. She had a tablet connected to the courtroom's display screen. She pulled up a Snapchat post from an account belonging to Preston Caldwell, the account bearing his own photograph as the profile image. The post had been made at 11:23 p.m. on March 14th, 2024, 36 minutes after the crash at Whitmore Avenue and 3rd Street. The image showed Preston from the chest up, clearly indoors, in what appeared to be a bar or lounge, holding a glass with an amber-colored drink, laughing with his head tilted back. The caption, written by Preston Caldwell in his own words, read as follows. Sandra Lowe read it slowly into the official record. She paused after each section. Lamau cops let me go, with 2 laughing emoji, and then, Dad's got to be good for something, right? The gallery made a sound. It was not a gasp and it was not a murmur. It was the sound of a room full of people breathing in at the same moment and not quite breathing back out. Bailiff Thomas, standing at the side door, locked his jaw and looked straight ahead. Beverly at the clerk's desk had stopped writing. and Maggie Torres at the plaintiff's table sat very still, as she had been sitting throughout all of these days. But for the first time since I had seen her walk through that door, her eyes were wet. She did not let the tears fall. She pressed her lips together once, just once, and looked at the table in front of her. She had 23 years of training in holding herself together in rooms where people were in pain. She used every single year of it in that one moment. What comes next is the part I have replayed more times than I can count, because it is the part where everything that has been building in this story arrives at the same place at the same time, every piece of evidence, piece of every lie told through omission, every small cruelty disguised as inconvenience, every act of quiet dignity that Maggie Torres performed when no one was watching and no one would have blamed her for falling apart. It all arrives together right here. What I'm about to tell you about how I handled the next 30 minutes is the reason I am still on this bench today, and the reason certain other people in Cedar Falls no longer hold the positions they held on April 11th, 2024. Do not go anywhere. We are almost there, and this is the part that matters most. Gerald Fitch immediately moved to have the Snapchat evidence excluded, arguing that proper chain of custody and digital evidence authentication had not been established. Sandra Lowe had prepared for this moment completely. She produced a sworn affidavit from Dr. Renee Okafor, a certified digital forensics analyst, confirming the post's timestamp, the account ownership, and the metadata authenticity with a documented confidence level of 100%. I admitted the evidence into the record. Gerald Fitch sat down and said nothing further on that motion. Preston Caldwell then stood up without being called upon. Gerald Fitch grabbed his sleeve. Preston pulled his arm free and stood there in front of the entire courtroom in his expensive blazer with the Rolex on his wrist, and he said loudly enough for every person in that room to hear without straining, "This is theater. None of this matters. This judge does not have the authority to do anything that my father cannot undo by tomorrow morning." He was looking directly at me when he said it. He said my father the way someone says a rank, the way someone says a force of nature, like it was not a relationship but a fact of the universe. The room held its breath for the second time that morning. I did not raise my voice. My father told me once that the day you have to shout to maintain your authority is the day you have already lost it, and I have never forgotten that. I said, "Mr. Caldwell, you are in contempt of this court. That will be reflected in today's record." Then I reached to my left. There is a telephone on the bench at Cedar Falls Municipal Courthouse. It has been there since before I first sat down in that chair. I have used it perhaps a dozen times in 28 years. I lifted the receiver. I asked Beverly, whose station sits directly below the bench, to dial the personal cell phone number for Chief Raymond Caldwell as listed in the Cedar Falls Police Department's internal directory. I told her clearly in front of everyone to put it on speaker. I am going to tell you something about myself right now that I do not share easily. When I picked up that phone, my hand was not fully steady. I am telling you that because I think it matters that you know it. 28 years on this bench, thousands of decisions made in this room, and I still felt the weight of that moment all the way into my hands. I was not afraid. I was not angry. I was standing at the edge of something that could not be taken back once I crossed it, and I knew it with complete clarity, and I chose to step forward anyway. I have asked myself many times since that morning whether I would do it the same way again. Every single time, the answer is yes. Have you ever had to make a decision knowing it would change everything, knowing there was no undoing it? I think those moments are where we find out who we actually are when the comfortable options run out. The phone rang 4 times on speaker, 4 long rings in a very quiet courtroom. Then Chief Raymond Caldwell answered. He said his name the way powerful people answer phones, sharp, short, certain. I identified myself as the presiding judge in case number 2024 MC 00741 at Cedar Falls Municipal Courthouse. I told him I was in open session and that his son was present in the courtroom. I told him the court had received certified evidence regarding his personal involvement in the alteration of official police documentation, specifically the deletion of a blood alcohol content result from an accident report filed on March 14, 2024. I told him the Inspector General's office had already been formally notified and that a referral to the state attorney's office was being prepared before the close of business that day. I said all of this clearly at normal speaking volume, into the speaker on that telephone so that every person in courtroom 3 at 114 Garrison Street could hear every word of it. There was a silence on that phone that was the longest silence I have ever heard inside my courtroom. Chief Raymond Caldwell, badge 001, said nothing for what felt like 20 full seconds. I waited. The gallery waited. Preston Caldwell, sitting at the defense table, looked like a 24-year-old who had just discovered for the first time in his life that there was a room where his father's name did not open the door. And then Chief Caldwell said one sentence. He said, "I understand, Your Honor." The line went quiet. I set the receiver down. Tell me the truth right now. Do you still believe that real justice is possible? I am not asking about perfect justice. The law is never perfect, and I know that better than anyone who has sat in this chair. I am asking about real justice, the kind that looks at a person's connections, their designer clothes, their expensive car, their father's badge number, and sees them anyway, exactly as they are, no more and no less than any other person standing in that room. Because what I am about to tell you about how I sentenced Preston Caldwell is going to ask that question of every single one of you. Have your answer ready. I looked at the room after I set that receiver down. Maggie Torres was sitting completely still, as she had been every morning of these proceedings. Bailiff Thomas had not moved from his position by the side door. Beverly had written every word into the official record. Gerald Fitch was studying his legal pad as though it held information he needed right now. Preston Caldwell was looking at his hands on the defense table, and those hands were not performing anything. They were not confident. They were not arrogant. They were just a young man's hands on a table in a courtroom where everything he had counted on had just been publicly removed. The following morning, April 13th, 2024, I arrived at my usual time, drank my coffee alone in my chambers, and read through everything one final time. I thought about my father. He used to say that when the facts are clear and the truth is visible and you know what is right, the hardest part is not deciding what to do. The hardest part is saying it out loud with enough honesty that the room understands you are not performing justice. You are doing it. I held that for a while. Then I put on my robe and I walked to the bench. I looked at every person in that room before I began to speak. I looked at Maggie Torres in her carefully pressed clothes with her quiet hands folded in front of her. I looked at Preston Caldwell in his blazer with his new expression that had shed every layer of arrogance and held only a kind of stunned waiting. I looked at Gerald Fitch sitting very still. I looked at James Whitfield in the gallery, who had driven back to hear the end. I looked at Marcus Webb from the Inspector General's office. I thought about 28 years of mornings walking into rooms exactly like this one. I thought about every person who had ever sat in Maggie Torres's chair. And then I began. Before I tell you the exact sentence I handed down that morning, I need you to do one thing right now. Subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell, because the next story I'm bringing to you has been sitting in my files longer than this one. It involves a family, a court-appointed attorney, and a piece of evidence that was deliberately hidden for 11 years. When I tell stories like this one, they go fast, and if you are not subscribed with the bell on, you will miss it entirely. I have been doing this work for 28 years, and I have not started telling these stories to stop now. Turn on every notification. I will be back soon, and you cannot afford to miss what is coming. I told Preston Caldwell that reckless driving is not a mistake of distraction. It is a choice. At 52 miles per hour in a 25 mile per hour zone on a city street at night, a person has made a series of decisions, one after another, each one leading to the next, that place every other human being on that road at risk of their life. I told him that Margaret Torres had spent 23 years showing up at midnight for strangers in pain, that she had put her children to bed alone on most nights of their lives, that she had paid off her car with her own labor and maintained it carefully because there was no backup plan, and that in less than 1 second his choices had taken from her family $11,847 in medical bills, $9,360 in lost wages, and $4,200 in vehicle replacement value that she could not absorb without borrowing money from her sister. I told him that the Snapchat post made at 11:23 p.m. on March 14th, 2024, 36 minutes after he drove away from that intersection, told this courtroom with complete clarity that his first feeling after leaving the scene was not concern for the woman in the car he had just destroyed. His first feeling was relief that consequences had been removed. And I told him that if he believed consequences could always be removed by the right phone call, this courtroom was where that belief ended. I sentenced Preston Caldwell to 180 days in the county facility, with 90 days suspended pending full compliance with all conditions of sentence. I ordered complete restitution of $25,607 to Margaret Torres, covering her documented medical expenses, her lost wages, and the replacement value of her vehicle, payable in full within 60 days. I ordered 200 hours of community service to be completed at Cedar Falls Regional Medical Center, specifically in the emergency department, assisting with patient transport, administrative support, and direct patient services under the supervision of department staff. Not because I believed it would transform Preston Caldwell into a different person, because I believed that a person who had spent his life treating the work of people like Maggie Torres as invisible should spend 200 hours standing inside it. I referred the matter of report alteration and prior incident suppression to the state attorney's office for formal investigation of Chief Raymond Caldwell and Officer Dana Reeves, badge 2247, and I stated both names clearly and completely on the record. Stop for a moment right now. Please, just stop and be still wherever you are. Put down whatever is in your other hand, because what I'm about to tell you about what happened in the 30 seconds after that gavel came down is something I need you to receive fully, not halfway. It is one of the smallest things that happened in that entire case. It took maybe 4 seconds, and it is the part of this story that I have carried the longest and the most carefully. Be still. Here it is. Preston Caldwell said nothing after I finished. He sat at the defense table with his hands flat on the surface and his head bent slightly forward, and he was completely silent. Gerald Fitch was writing. The gallery was quiet in the way a room is quiet after something has finally been said that could not be unsaid. And Maggie Torres turned in her chair and looked at me, just looked. No smile, no tears, no gesture. She simply looked at me with an expression that I will carry for the rest of my life, and it was not quite gratitude. It was something older than gratitude. It was recognition. It was one person looking at another and saying without any words at all, "I see that you saw me." That was it. I nodded once. She nodded once back. I struck the gavel. Court adjourned. I stood and walked to my chambers, and I sat down alone, and I gave myself exactly 4 minutes to feel everything before Beverly knocked and told me the next docket was ready. In the weeks following April 13th, 2024, the following things happened. Preston Caldwell paid the full restitution of $25,607 to Margaret Torres within 41 days of sentencing. His attorney filed 2 separate motions to reduce or modify the community service component, and both were denied. He began his court-ordered hours at Cedar Falls Regional Medical Center on June 3, 2024. He reported to the emergency department at 7 a.m. on that first day, and I was told months later that the staff there did not treat him gently or harshly. They treated him like someone who was new and had a job to do, which was, I thought when I heard it, exactly right. Chief Raymond Caldwell was placed on administrative leave by the City of Cedar Falls on April 19, 2024, pending investigation by the State Attorney's Office. Officer Dana Reeves, badge 2247, was placed on suspension the same day. The State Attorney's Office formally opened its investigation on April 22, 2024. I did not track the outcome of that investigation closely because it was not mine to oversee, but I knew the file was open and I knew the names were on it, and sometimes that is the most important first step. Sometimes the beginning of accountability looks less like a verdict and more like a name on a document that can no longer be erased. On a Thursday morning in late September 2024, approximately 5.5 months after the sentencing in case number 2024 MC00741, Beverly set a sealed envelope on my desk before I arrived. It had my courthouse address on it and no return address. Inside was a single handwritten page. The handwriting was careful and even, and the paper was plain white. It said the following: It said that she had used the restitution money to purchase a reliable used car, a 2018 Toyota Corolla, that her daughter Kezia had started her senior year and was applying to colleges, that her son Darnell had made the dean's list at community college, and that she had gone back to work at Cedar Falls Regional on May 2nd, 2024, the day her physical therapist cleared her for full duty. She said she had thought a long time about whether to send this letter. She said she decided to send it because she thought I should know that the things that happened in that courtroom had mattered beyond its four walls. She did not use my name. She addressed it to Your Honor. She signed it only, Monsieur Torres. I am going to tell you something about that letter. I read it twice at my desk on that Thursday morning in September alone, with my black coffee still hot beside me and the courthouse quiet around me. And then I folded it carefully and put it in the bottom right drawer of my desk where I keep the things that matter most. Not the verdicts, not the headlines. The things that remind me why I walk into this building every morning before anyone else gets here. The things that remind me that what happens in these rooms ripples out into real lives, into a 19-year-old's dean's list, into a 16-year-old's college applications, into a 2018 Toyota Corolla that gets a woman home safely from her midnight shifts, those things. That letter lives in that drawer. I want to talk to you directly right now in this last part of the story, the way I have been talking to you from the very beginning, the way you talk to someone you trust. My father spent his whole life in the law, and the thing he said to me more times than any other thing was this. He said, rules without heart become weapons. He said it simply like it was obvious, the way he said most things that were true. He said the courtroom is the last place on earth where every single person must be treated as equal. Not the same, equal. The same is a different thing. Equal means the weight of what you carry matters as much as the weight anyone else carries, no more and no less, regardless of who your father is or what is on your wrist or what car you drove to get here. Preston Caldwell walked into my courtroom wearing the uniform of someone who had never been required to be equal to anyone. He wore it with ease. He wore it like it was the natural order of things. And for 24 years, in every room before that one, it had been. His father had made sure of it. Every blank line in every altered report, every incident closed before it could reach a courtroom, every phone call answered at 11:03 p.m. That is not love. I want to say that clearly. What his father did was not love. Love teaches a child that the world requires something of them. What Chief Raymond Caldwell did was build a room around his son where the world never could. And the day that room ran out of walls was the day Preston stood at the defendant's table in my courtroom and announced to everyone that his father should have already handled this. The thing about real justice is that it is not about punishment. I have said this to myself for 28 years, and I will say it until the day I retire. Punishment without connection to the harm done is just more harm moving in a different direction. Real justice looks at the damage, looks at the person who caused it, and finds a sentence that makes those two things speak directly to each other. 200 hours in the emergency department where Maggie Torres had given 23 years of her life was not about humiliation. It was about visibility. It was about standing inside a world you had treated as invisible and being required to see it clearly, one 12-hour shift at a time. I think about Maggie Torres often. I think about the way she pressed her clothes that first morning. I think about the way she nodded once and did not need anything else from me. I think about her daughter Kezia applying to colleges and her son Darnell on the dean's list and the 2018 Toyota Corolla getting her home from the midnight shifts. I think about how none of those things would have moved forward the same way if the truth had stayed buried in a blank line on a police report. The truth did not stay buried. It never does. Not completely. It just waits. It waits for someone to be brave enough to write one honest sentence at the bottom of a third page. It waits for a supply driver named James Whitfield to go to the police station the morning after an accident he did not cause because he has a daughter about the same age as the woman in that silver car. It waits for the right morning, the right courtroom, and a telephone on the bench that still has a working speaker. My father used to say that the law is just a set of words on paper until somebody decides those words mean something. He said it takes human beings, real ones with real courage, to make the law live. I think about that every single morning when I pull into my parking spot at 6:42 a.m. and walk into that building before anyone else. I think about the cases waiting in those folders. I think about the people who are going to walk through my door carrying everything they have. I think about what it costs them to get to that chair and sit in it, and I make myself a promise, the same promise I make every single morning, that I am going to see them, every single one of them, no matter who else is in the room and no matter what they are wearing and no matter what name they carry. I am going to see them exactly as they are. That is the only thing this bench ever asked of me. That is the only thing it still asks, and I intend to keep delivering it for as long as I can. If you stayed with me through every single moment of this story, I need you to know that you are exactly the kind of person I made this for. What you just did, giving your full attention to Maggie Torres and James Whitfield and to the truth that almost got buried under a blank line on an official document, that matters. That is not a small thing. From the bottom of my heart, thank you. If this story moves something in you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today, and come back very soon. Because the next story I am going to tell you is the one that made me question everything I thought I knew about what justice looks like from inside the family it is supposed to protect. It is waiting for you. I will see you there.